welcome to the People by People podcast with me, your host, Laura Sutherland. Today, I am very excited to welcome Katy Howell, who I have been watching on Twitter. We've finally got to meet each other through the podcast, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the show, Katy.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So tell us a little bit about yourself before we kick off.
Yes, so I have probably my most recent career is in launching 16 years ago a social media agency, which started out really when blogs and wikis and MySpace were all the rage. And we have been going for 16 years, helping brands make a difference. Our purpose really is to break the social boring on social, because unfortunately, one of the challenges with social media is how damn boring it is. And brands, frankly, add quite a lot to the boringness of social media.
Well, broadcast, isn't it?
Even just if it was entertaining, I don't think it would matter. But so many brands just put out a post every day. My favorite example, Laura, is Motivational Monday, because I'd love to ask your listeners and yourself, do you follow the hashtag Motivational Monday?
No. Well, to be fair, I occasionally will look up some stuff on Instagram, Monday Motivation, to see what kind of inspiration it might bring me. I'm guilty of looking that up, but I don't follow it on Twitter or anything like that. No.
You're the first person I've ever met. In the main, nobody follows, whatever it is, Wisdom Wednesday. We produce content for this stuff, and it never fails to amaze me.
Yeah. You can do that any day of the week. You should always be motivating people and inspiring people, shouldn't you?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, so one of the things that you and I talked about before we started recording was the difference between PR and marketing. Give me your take on that.
See, now this is an age-old debate, isn't it? Yes. But when it comes to social media, I think there are some stark differences. Having sort of sat both sides of the fence in my time over 16 years, where social media felt like its original home but belonged in the PR industry. But it made the switch into marketing quite quickly. And it did so because the marketing industry understood two other elements to that. One was paid media and the other was data.
Yeah.
And used data to analyze behavioral science, which kind of left a lot of the PR industry behind. And as social progressed and Facebook and Twitter came on board, and now we're all the way through to the joys of TikTok, is that you've got this situation now where for many people in marketing and digital, the understanding of even what we would consider the basics, like Google Analytics, how to source data from tools like Brandwatch, how to understand, even the simplicity of what hashtag to use, is kind of not the same for the large majority of the PR industry. And so there's now a two-tier system running. And as social gets more and more sophisticated, and the business of social media for most brands is a serious proposition with a very hardcore ROI, a loss of not only the opportunities to see, which is a reference we rarely make in the marketing industry, OTS, or AVEs.
Oh, don't.
which I know there is, I've always hated them, but we would never consider them at all in marketing. So having straddled both sides, I kind of feel like that the differences shouldn't be there, but they are, and it's easier, and I think we were talking about earlier, it's easier to teach young marketeers with a marketing background how to find the hooks in a story than it is to teach those with a PR background how to untangle social data, what's evidence, statistical evidence is, what variation is, all of these things when you're looking at data which indicates behavioural. So behavioural science, for instance.
Here's something really interesting, because when I did before the Driven Pledge was launched, I spoke to Rohan Shah about recruitment into the industry. And one of the things that we were talking about was skills and specialisms. And I kind of said, well, you know, we're talking about diversity, we're talking about making the industry more inclusive, yes, and more diverse, yes, but getting the right skills in means that sometimes we have to actually look out with our own industry. So, for example, if it's behavioural science, then don't get someone that has behavioural science qualifications and experience. If it's someone that's, you know, data scientist, or someone that is a coder or developer, so that there are these skills coming in. And I think that's where, like we referenced earlier on, how sometimes it's like banging your head off a brick wall speaking to the traditional PR people who they can't see a past media relations. The media relations is their go-to thing for, here's a problem, let's write a press release, let's get a statement out, rather than thinking about solving the problem and what data there is to inform how that might happen. And that is, you know, the thinking that I have comes from 19 plus years of working in integration, and looking for the information to support how you move forward. But also, the way that you said it's easier to teach a marketing person, do you feel that's because marketeers have more of an ambition to learn to be a sort of more rounded practitioner than PR practitioners?
No, and I do worry about, you know, I'm popping PR in a media relations box here, and I do feel quite bad about it. I don't think that's the case. I don't think it's that PR people don't want to learn. It's just that they believe creativity is not maths, and whereas marketeers, because digital became so integrated into what they do, starting with display, for instance, and SEO, that there is no assumption that there is a creative brain and an analytical brain. We are all one big mushy brain. And I'm not saying it's better, it's just we're taking advantage. But I would also say there's something really interesting which kind of plays into what Rowan said to you, which is immediate future. There was no such thing as a social media manager when we started. We had to, in fact, we still have the original job descriptions we wrote and then rewrote every year. Do you know what I mean? So we actually have what we call as kind of a competency wheel.
Yeah.
What we did when we had a requirement for a new skill. So when I started in social media, there was no such thing as paid. You didn't pay to play. There was no advertising. Okay. So when advertising came on board, we had to bring in a whole series of people that not only did nobody know how to skill them, but how the hell were they going to fit in to what was then just organic. So we had good copywriters, great visuals, that kind of stuff, but not, you know, no particular video, because most of the platforms didn't take video, you know, apart from YouTube. That was it, you know. So you have to remember, we were always adopting and absorbing like a big kind of amoeba. We swallowed up, and I think that it's as much about how you run your business. And I think what we did before we took on someone from, say, paid, and we knew roughly what we needed to do, is all the senior people learned how to do it. Even if we didn't know ins and outs, we educated ourselves so that we understood how that would get integrated into our business. So there isn't a single person in my organization who could not, don't do it every day, jump on the back end of paid and do something with it. Maybe I'm probably the only one would take about 20 minutes longer than everybody else. But the reality is that it's about integrating those talents and skill sets and then helping them broaden what they're doing. So all our people who worked in paid also got Brandwatch certified, because learning about analytics was just as important, even if they only touched on it in their career with ours. The reality is we broaden the skills out to give them start in their careers.
Yeah, I think that then kind of comes back to previous podcasts where we've talked about what is PR, what's holding PR back, which we'll move on from shortly, but it's obviously good to get people's perspectives on it. But it kind of comes back to as well this whole labeling thing, like what is PR, what is the value of PR, and the debate that PR people have with themselves constantly about it. Like, describe what PR does, and it's like, well, no, just say what you're going to do, what's your purpose, what you're going to achieve for your client or your organization, and go and do it. Have the skills and go and do it. Stop messing about.
Well, like I said, our only purpose for Immediate Future, we don't see ourselves as a social agency per se, although that's our skill set. What we see ourselves as the people that break that boring on social.
Yes.
And that gives our brand stand out, which means that they get more attention, which means they get more results.
Love it. There's your elevator pitch right there.
Rehearsed it.
I love it. But we're here to talk more about the social aspect. In particular, one of the things that we wanted to touch on was cancel culture.
The pandemic has accelerated a number of things for us as a society, and more people than ever are on social media. I mean, and bouncing about social media. The need to connect has been accelerated terrifically, but also other aspects. We've become hyper aware of our environment, really aware of politics, really aware of people's perceptions and thoughts. And I think, so cancel culture has been part of that, the awareness of diversity. People are saying we will buy more from brands that show that their leadership is diverse. Somewhere like 54% of people in the UK will buy more, or are more likely to choose a brand that has a diverse leadership. They're also more likely to use a brand that is sustainable. But the opposite side of that is cancel culture, which has really been born out of celebrity public figures, where people said, I don't want this person anymore. You know, we don't like what this person is saying, so we will refuse them effectively a voice, and getting rid of them off radio, out of social media. We've seen it again and again, and it started really with those very polarizing voices, and now it can be anyone, all the way through to J.K. Rowling. You know, it's a state of mind that as a society we are in. It's a behaviour we're in right now. For brands, this has come as somewhat of a surprise, I have to say, which is that they too can be cancelled. And I think it heightened through BLM when many brands started virtue signalling, and then they got called out for having skin whitening creams or producing their trainers in, with slave labour, or with labour that turned out to be children, or etc., etc. So it feels like, as a nation, and I'm just talking about the UK, but it applies to pretty much all of Europe, there is an underlying anger at being fooled, being faked.
Yeah.
And that really has driven this. So it's a really interesting thing. It's not about kids being woke, it's about frustration. And it can be really soul-sucking sometimes, because you put a foot wrong and suddenly you find yourself in the maelstrom of very contrary views. Yes. And that takes, we're still all humans sitting behind computers, and that takes a lot of resilience and patience and, frankly, very thick skins. So for most businesses, they're not really that polarized. Okay, so they feel like this might not happen to them. Well, it might. And I think it's about going back to basics. I find a lot of what I talk about is going back to basics.
Yeah.
Which is, businesses have got away with a veneer of what they want people to think they are, but they don't behave this way. And back in the early days, when we called this Web 2.0 instead of social media, we talked about, there was a lot of conversation about inside out organizations, so that the beauty of the new interwebby thing was that you would be able to see how an organization really behaved. Well, a lot of organizations ignored that and just put up prettier pictures.
Yeah.
So I think for most brands right now, they need to audit their business from a comms perspective right now and look at where their weaknesses are, where their issues lie. And I frankly, quite a lot of them would look at them and find them pretty shabby. So
Yeah.
that is about, where are you? Where, if you're saying you are best at customer service, how are you proving that?
Yeah.
If you say your products are ethical, how are you proving that? All of these things, which is, which is obvious, isn't it? But amazing.
And it's funny when you go and if you speak to a new client and you say, who are your audience? What do they think? Oh, well, they think this. And how do you know that? Well, we just know. Okay. Have you asked them? And that's the thing, because if you're trying to say that you're doing this, or you're trying to say that you're acting in this way, are you following up? Because as you said, you have to follow up with the action. You can't just say something. And from a leadership perspective, whether it's internal communication or whether it's with your external stakeholders or whoever it might be, you have to follow up with action. And stock shots on websites are not cutting it anymore.
And and here's the next step is this, because most big organizations, their comms and marketing is siloed away from the rest of the business.
Yeah.
And so the next part is exactly that: internal comms. Internal communications should be absolutely top of the agenda. I often used to joke in the day, the trouble with internal comms, it's in the cupboard under the stairs. Which of course now has Harry Potter connotations. People just said, we've got an internal comms department of one, sitting in here desperately trying to get out newsletters. It should never be that. Your internal comms has got to be right if you're going to build advocacy, and your advocacy comes from your employees first and comes back out again. So ramping up internal comms and then investing in trust. If you run quarterly campaigns where you dash from one thing to the next and your objectives change every 5 minutes and nobody knows what you stand for, it's really hard to build trust. So for many brands, they're suffering cancel culture because people actually underlyingly do not trust them. And then have a triage process, because sometimes stuff just comes out. A great example is, I hate to mention the man's name, but I'm going to, which is Lawrence Fox came out with how he wasn't going to shop in Sainsbury's anymore because it was all about segregation, racial segregation, some rubbish anyway. I'll make it very clear what my opinion on that is.
Don't mince your words.
Which is remarkable given that he's also criticised cancel culture. He was effectively cancelling Sainsbury's. What was really interesting was how many, not just Sainsbury's themselves, their reaction was kind of like, I think the best tweet back was, hey guys, all clear at Sainsbury's now. It was like, yes, it was fabulous. And so the reality is that you need a triage system, so you don't need jerk your way through when this happens to you, if this happens to you. So a crisis triage that says, is this actually a massive issue? Is this something we're going to have to call a proper crisis meeting on, or is this a blip or a troll?
Or is it an issue so far? Yeah.
Is it an issue?
Yeah.
So having that triage system in place, and again, I find that it exists often in the PR wider offline world, but it doesn't exist on social media. Again, and social media's too fast, way fast, and most people still spend their social time in evenings and weekends, yet nobody looks at it in business. It is, I would say again, it's old-fashioned good communications, which is a good plan, good support for your staff, an understanding of the speed at which social will work, and that sometimes things fly through and they're done and dusted in 24 hours, and other times they can escalate. And when you're in crisis mode, or if your organization is being called out, that it is not just a responsibility of some youngster battling away through Twitter and Instagram, etc. So it's about finding those kind of paths and planning your way out of it, and not being fearful, because the worst thing cancel culture could do to us as a society is turn everything vanilla, where
Yeah.
people are too scared to be different. And that is real challenge for brands. They have to be different enough, but they also now need to make sure that they carry an ethical and sustainable thread through what they do.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of touching on that ethical point there, like we're talking a lot just now about AI. We're talking a lot about automation. You know, we're storing data. We're using data for strategy and stuff. What's your experience of the ethical side of data, and what have you got any examples of things you might have seen? You don't have to name names, but or even actually if things are public and public domain of unethical use of data. You know, we know that there's been social platforms, for example, who have been called out for not having the right security systems in place for storing data and then it being hacked.
Yeah, and I think it happens probably more innocently than we assume. The reality is that most brands that access social data don't get to see very much in terms of detail. You know, that there is no amount of money that can be thrown at this to understand everybody's individual parts. So I'm not being naive. I'm just saying that in the main, what we're looking at when we look at data is behavioural changes. So we're looking to see what are interests, what are associations. You know, we're understanding how hashtags come and go, what interesting topics are coming and going, how people are changing their behaviors, why they're shifting, why reels didn't take off when TikTok did. You know, what is the rationale behind that, and understanding that. And it is, in all honesty, no different from a survey data. You know, the ethical point is people being aware that this is being collected and what is being collected. And honestly, most of the social profiles collect way more data than anybody could care less about.
Yeah.
I mean, as most of the marketers, we don't work in the political sphere. We work with commercial brands and organisations and charities. So the reality is we're not looking to game the system. In fact, in nowhere through the 16 years that I have worked in social has the how to hack LinkedIn and gaming the system ever been part of what we have proposed.
Yeah.
And that is because it always comes back to bite you.
Yeah. Oh, well, yeah. Yeah.
So my view is it's about doing the right that we use the data to see what will be relevant to you. And you know, when people talk personalization, I am never talking about personalizing it to Laura. You
Yeah.
know, I'm talking about swathes of people.
Yeah.
And the big differentiator is where we used to use SIC codes, SIC codes, to sort of categorize people into all sorts of different interest groups, and where we use demographics like, you know, 40s to 50-year-old mother of grown-up children living in the southeast, you know, which are just too blunt, because we all know, and I know as a woman in her 50s living, I do not hang around with loads of other women in their 50s in Walton-on-Thames.
Yeah.
I just do that. So what I do though is I hang around with lots of people who are really into knitting, because I'm knitting madly at the moment, really
Oh,
resin art, or really into dogs and walking their dogs. You know, that my connections are based on my interest groups in
yeah.
my locality and region. So I belong to my local hubs and all that kind of stuff on Facebook. And then of course my work profile
Yeah.
says I'm interested in, you know, diversity conversations. So I spend a lot of time looking at those conversations, looking at what people are doing, calling out manels with dice, you know, all that kind of stuff. That's a bit. So if you were to profile people like me, then
Yeah.
you put us into a group and build up a persona, and that is what that data is about.
Yeah.
So
I
I
also I also don't think that the like this is a sort of I suppose a thing, like, you know, we've CIPR and PRC have Ethics Month. But you know, we shouldn't be thinking of, we shouldn't ever have to I don't think we should ever have to stop and say, is that ethical? I think it should be that it's ingrained in us that we're ethical because we're making the right decisions, we're doing the right thing, we're obeying the law, and you know. But I think there's this thing when someone throws the word ethics at you, some people stop and they're like, "Oh, hang on a minute. Does that mean that I've got to abide by some sort of other special code, or you know?" And I think people think it's more difficult, inverted commas, than it actually is. It's just about being ethical and how you work.
It is, and I think one of the challenges is, and it, you know, and I get asked this a lot, which is, what's wrong with all the data? Why are they doing? What's the negative side of all of this? Not how you can approach data in a positive and ethical way. So that nobody asks that. Nobody says, tell me, how can you approach data in a more ethical fashion? And how can you how can you, rather what they want to ask us is, oh, Facebook's pulling all this data, surely they're listening to you anyway. And it's like, oh, you know, look, the regulations are going to get tougher and tougher and tougher, thank heavens. And in reality, for those of us working within Europe, whether we're in or out of the European Union, we have to comply to GDPR if we're collecting European data. And GDPR is very good because it keeps everything very anonymous. It keeps everything tightened down. And I'm not really interested in the detail. I don't want to know the detail. I want to know the trends, the swathes of change. That's the bit that's most interesting. And the rationale behind that is because social is all about reach. It's not about one-on-one conversations. For brands, social is a reach platform. It actually sits in this day and age much more comfortably alongside TV, out of home, than it does alongside, say, email. Yeah. And I know that sounds like really counterintuitive to everything everybody talks about, how social media is a conversation. But social media is not a conversation with a brand.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, that there's a fine line for brands which can make people feel special by doing what they do, and that one-to-one conversation, because there's no way a brand like, you know, it could have a one-to-one conversation with every single one of its customers, but it can still do things and make them feel special because it has that sort of data with the trends and everything to make it feel like it's listening, to make it feel that the consumer is special to them.
Let me give you an example. We did a barbecue report last year, not this year.
A barbecue report?
A report on barbecue. How do people talk about barbecues? You know, what food do they talk about? And all the brands coming out with, this is vegan, blah, blah, blah. Actually, do you know what? The vast majority of conversations are about chicken and beef burgers and sausages. And actually, the biggest spike in conversation was what sauces you used and what marinade you used, not vegan. So while vegan will be a punch through, if I was to run a bigger campaign on this, actually what I would be doing is talking to the condiment brands about how they promote their condiments. You can do something on vegan, but actually the bigger story, the vast mass of people are still cooking chicken wings, you know. Yeah. And this is why I love data, because it stops you from falling into those filter bubble holes you talked about before, which is everything for everybody who I know is like this. It actually makes you look at the world in a much more even keel way and look at the reality of what's going on out there. And when you think that social is a reach platform and therefore it is all about being relevant, if I can put stuff in front of you that is relevant to you, if you clearly look like, which Facebook thinks I do, look like I like walking, because I'm always talking about walking the dogs, I'm always liking things, and at the moment I need a new pair of hiking boots, and I'm suddenly getting served it. I know why, because I keep bloody looking at them and going, oh my God, how much do they cost? But reality is I'm quite pleased to see those ads. I am quite pleased to see those ads because I'm finding new brands that I didn't know existed. I'm going beyond what my focus would have been and finding new brands that I'd never thought of using. And I'm going and investigating them. So I'm quite enjoying this process. And that means that those ads are being served to me because they are relevant to me right now.
They're value, yeah.
Exactly. And that's where we need to get to. We don't need to know the ins and outs. Don't need to listen into your conversation to get that data. You're telling me that data.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, I think we need to talk much more, not just about the ethics, but actually how do you make this a reality? So, how do we take that knowledge of the way the platforms will behave and make it a reality, that we behave ethically with data? And I think it's very doable. I think regulations will come in that will make the platforms behave better.
Yeah.
But for those of us who have behaved ethically anyway, less data is not a big thing.
Yeah.
I'm not bothered about cookie data either.
Yeah.
My general view is my understanding is about sways of audiences. That's the bit I'm interested in.
I think people can get a bit hung up sometimes on, well, not hung up, rightly so, data and privacy, on platforms. But equally, if people were more aware of it in the first place, they would be able to opt in or opt out of whatever they wanted from the start, rather than someone tells them there's this magic button you have to go and press so that they don't listen to you or follow you, or, you can go into your phone, for example, and undo this, click here. And it's just like a bit, I was going to say it might be overwhelming. It might be overwhelming for people that aren't born in this sort of tech era where these things kind of come to you, to go in and do that habitually, or to look out for that box. But I think for maybe the older generation, especially, I'm thinking of like my mum, who, I get a phone call every day about something that's broken and she didn't touch it. It wasn't her fault. But generally there's, some easy solution around it. But yeah, I think if the platforms as brands themselves were more tuned into the welfare, which I think they're starting to be, of the users, and the users being people, not necessarily the brands, but the people themselves, then the world might be a better place.
Oh, absolutely. I do have to call you out and say it's not only old people. In my experience, I have met hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people in their teens, tweens, 20s who don't understand how this all works because they make it so complicated. So it's not just us oldies.
You mean the phones and stuff?
Oh, yeah. You don't know that half the things you can and can't do on your phones and what data is being pulled from it. Because it's kind of like trying to read your insurance policy. I mean, frankly, who reads their insurance policy? Very few of us read it paged all the way from the front to the back, do we? We buy the cheapest car insurance because it covers ours, or it only becomes a problem when we have to unpick it.
There's not going to be a 2.0, but do you think that we will continue to expand in our reels and TikToks and all the crazy things, or do you think that we'll start to maybe come back to a core sense of sharing and discussion?
It's really interesting. This has been floating around for the last couple of weeks, or a couple of months actually, on a lot of private groups I belong to. And I think it's quite interesting. First of all, the death of social is not imminent any more than the death of TV has, even though people have proclaimed it for years. Social has already begun to shift position. It's understood that it's no longer a medium solely for one-to-one conversations for small groups and private groups. What it's done is shifted by bringing up Messenger and groups, which allow for the kind of interactions where people get together and have that closer network. And there's been an enormous growth in private networks like Guild, the private business network, which are phenomenally useful. Wonderful groups, small groups on Facebook, like the one we belong to, that WODS runs, where people kind of almost know each other in the real world a bit. I belong to a number of neighbourhood ones that tell you about somebody's lost cat and moan about how much litter there is on the road.
It's the rise of community again, isn't it?
Yeah. But it's not killing social. And this is the really fundamental. We need to stop trying to polarize this debate, because it's, look, we have as human beings this enormous capacity for our ability to switch between TV to radio to podcast to music in our ears to social. And what social is at its best, and I'm just being really positive because the world sometimes does bash social so much, is a wonderful entertainment platform. When I am bored, and let's frankly face it, bugger all on TV at the moment, I love watching TikToks. They just make me laugh. So on Instagram, I like looking at Baby Yoda memes. They just make me giggle, a bit like autocorrect, all of these things. It's about, the reality is social media is as much about entertainment as it is about connecting now. And it is shifting its focus from where it originally started, which is it's all about making connections, to being a more entertainment platform. And what makes it so different? You know how people kept saying, oh, now's the era of the mobile. Well,
yeah,
that came and went as far as I'm concerned, because this thing, and I'm holding up for those that can't see me, a mobile phone is such a wonderfully intimate experience, such an immersive one, because you generally, if you're young, you hold it in front of your face. If you're an old person like me, you hold it a meter away.
you can read it.
It's all encompassing, and that attention. Now, I can't put the kettle on when I'm doing that, because I am so, or if I am, my face is still stuck in the screen. I haven't left the room. And it is a wonderfully immersive experience. And I think that is the thing that we need to focus on. This is about entertaining, informational, useful, helpful, interesting, exciting. I think I've probably been, that we should be focused on as brands, because the only time a consumer or customer wants to talk to a brand is when they have a complaint, or when you're causing debate and thought leadership for B2B brands. So when you're creating a debate, when you're actually asking for some fun, even if you look at someone that, like Innocent, that's mentioned all the time, Innocent Drinks, the reason people respond to their posts, it's not they're having a conversation with them, they're having fun, they're being entertained. It's participative entertainment. And when we get our heads around that and away from trying to embed our brands in these small private communities, actually, I think PR learn a skill that is absolutely a priority in social media. And that skill is to work out where the hooks are. PRs are really good at this. Where's the hook for this magazine? Where's the hook for that? Where's the hook for this angle or this feature? How can I hook this? How can I build this story out so that it becomes more than? And that bit, PRs have a gift for.
Yeah.
That's the gift they need to accelerate by looking at data, saying, isn't that interesting that so we did this bit of research just recently on insurance, the insurance industry, looking at how people are talking about insurance during the pandemic, because it's obviously quite a bumpy ride as we park our cars up and wonder whether or not we should get car insurance, but also, can you imagine what it's been like on travel insurance?
Oh, yeah.
So we're looking at those conversations, and what we uncovered is actually what people will sacrifice cost, which is normally the biggest driver, for clarity on policies. They want clarity. They want someone to explain the gobbledygook in a way that they can understand it. When they get the explanation, there is quite a lot of joy associated with buying insurance. Those nuggets I've just fed you are hooks that any good PR will find their brain firing off on 100 different ways, going, oh, we could do this, we could do that. Those hooks are the hooks that make great content.
Yeah.
And that is what the PR skill set brings to social.
And I really hope that people start to invest and learn about technique and about creativity to marry with that, because it's great that, if you can come up with a hook, and it's great you can spot that opportunity, but it's then about making that come alive. And there are some really good agencies that I know of that have this sort of real good ability to take that and make it into something that's like not a stunt, but like a really good, clear campaign. Whereas I think sometimes with PR people, their creativity might come as a photo opportunity, or something like that's just kind of like run of the mill, anyone can do. But it's about having that bigger thinking, I think.
Yeah, they need to know what AR is right now, and they need to know how to develop instant experiences and what makes a good reel, and how to cut up videos so that it can be run in 10 seconds, 30 seconds, 1 minute. How you can create hooks through video to make somebody watch 12 minutes worth of speeches.
Yeah.
To know the techniques that change that shorter attention span, that keep people engaged on social, that those are learnt additional techniques.
Yeah.
And then they also need to learn how to use paid, because paid is a sophisticated channel now. And if you're smart and you marry your content with your paid, so you don't separate your media out, you can make social sing.
Yeah.
Really sing.
It's kind of understanding that when people say, can you make it go viral? Well, let's just stop right there. But if you do see some traction on a piece of content you have posted, then that's the opportunity to go in there and to start really paying that to promote it to the right people that are going to find it of value and seeing that take off. And there's nothing better than sort of having that satisfaction. You get your hourly stats that you're kind of looking at, and you're like, this is good, because it's demonstrating real ROI as well. And I think that's the thing, it's relating it back to what the objective was in the first place, which for a lot of traditional, people find it very difficult to do. But the integrated method and looking, as you say, at paid and earned and owned and shared is a much better way of demonstrating that. And that is answering the question of how do you prove the value.
Well, and one of those is if a client or if a boss or a leadership team says we want more followers, at that point you get up and walk out.
Yeah, because you just don't get it.
Never fails to more engagement, more followers. Oh, bleh. Yeah. That's my answer. Blah, blah, blah. That's not all right.
Like, is it not about sales, or is it about changing perceptions, or behavior change? Like, what is it?
Wonderful things that you can measure and want to reach and set as your goals. I mean, the other day I came across a site that's selling followers. You can buy 100,000 followers or whatever, and it's just I was exasperated. I thought these days were ended, but
well, that's all we've got time for, but thank you so much for taking time out to chat to me about all things social. And I think we're definitely in the agreement that there are opportunities for PR practitioners, there's opportunities for marketing, there's opportunities for everyone. I think it's just about kind of making sure that you've got your skills, they're for the moment and they're for the 21st century. We talked about AR, we talked about AI. These things are really, really important, and practitioners just need to keep on evolving. Because the likes of you and I will talk on Twitter about role models and about mentoring and stuff, and I think that type of stuff really sets like a proper example of what we expect, for people coming into the industry or people looking for jobs, and to keep our industry, our creative industry, going as well, because we do have a big opportunity, but we need to keep working at it.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me, Laura.
And thank you for tuning in to the People by People podcast. I am pleased to announce that there is one further guest to appear on the podcast before Christmas and New Year 2020. And then I'll be doing a solo podcast, a final episode of the year for the show, which will be looking at 2021 and what is coming up. But please do leave me a review and some feedback, and obviously any suggestions. I'd love to hear any suggestions you might have for future guests next year, topics for conversation. And also please do subscribe so that you get the next episode directly to your streaming app. But all it leaves me to say is thank you so much again for tuning in, and I will speak to you next week.